Texas lawmakers are moving full steam ahead with controversial new voting restrictions. The politicians behind it say they want to uphold election integrity. Critics call it voter suppression. For more on this, we bring in Dr. Eddy Carder with Prairie View A&M University. Good morning, Doc, and thank you so very much for joining us.
Good morning.
When you're thinking of what happened last week in the legislature, could this be a preemptive strike by Republicans who may be losing the state slowly but surely?
Jose, absolutely. That is the context in which the vote last week occurred. And the Texas Republicans are certainly living in some degree of fear and anxiety regarding what the future holds for their leadership in the state of Texas. Absolutely, that is the shadow in which those events took place.
Where does the Texas voting legislation stand right now?
Currently, the Senate had voted on the bill, Senate Bill 7, and it's proceeding to the House. And we don't know exactly when that will take place or when the vote will take place on the agenda, but that's where it's headed to. The governor was able to include this voting rights legislation as under the rubric of having been an emergency. And so thus he got the Senate to vote on and consider this issue early on in the legislative session. So that happened, interestingly enough, Jose, despite the fact that there was no significant evidence of significant amounts of voter fraud or election fraud in the past election. So it has to be concluded to a significant degree that one of the reasons why the legislature is considering this issue is exactly what you mentioned, that they are anticipating a shift in the perspective of the electorate, and that's going to impact Republican leadership in the state of Texas.
Okay, what is this going to mean moving forward? You know, because the restrictions seem to be pointed at minority voters and elderly voters as well.
Well, the legislation as it stands would certainly impact certain categories and groups and classes of voters in the state of Texas. For example, it would impact the ability and the capacity of shift workers in the most practical sense to be able to exercise their right to vote. It also would impact the physically disabled in exercising their right to vote. It would impact significant minority populations with regard to their privilege of exercising the right to vote. So that's the essential problem. What is the extent to which this is going to constitute a burden upon certain individuals and their desire to exercise something that we've regarded as sacred in our nation, and that is the right to vote.
Okay, you mentioned the right to vote. Constitutionally, what implications would the laws have?
That's one of the major concerns with regard to where this thing is headed. Obviously, the Democrats are challenging this particular piece of legislation. Secondly, not only the Democrats, but also corporations now are emerging in opposition to the legislation. Corporations such as Dell and American Airlines and AT&T, and I read this morning even Microsoft is voicing its opposition to these types of bills in the state of Texas and Georgia. But the ultimate concern is the constitutionality of these kinds of bills and this kind of legislation, because the issue is really not the intent behind the legislation so much as it is the possibility of a disparate impact upon these people groups in these various states, specifically here with regard to the state of Texas. So if it burdens the right to vote and an individual's privilege of exercising that right, or a group of individuals, then certainly there are constitutional considerations that probably will work their way through the legal system, and we will just have to wait and see how that works out. But once again, in the nation, legally and practically, we regard the right to vote as a very, very sacred right, not to be infringed upon or not to be tampered with. So in that sense, this legislation, I think, is significantly problematic, not only in Texas, but also in other states.
Dr. Eddy Carder with Prairie View A&M University, thank you so very much for joining us this morning.
Thank you, Jose.